In that world, it seems that there is someone called Shadow Hero. That person suddenly appears in times of crisis on the battlefield, but no one knows his true identity, and the only thing that is known is he was dressed in all black and wearing a blank mask. One day, he saved the life of a lady who seemed to be attacked by a monster. Although he was a bit late, he still managed to beat the monster. Unfortunately, the guards who was with the lady were all dead, so the Shadow Hero told the lady that he wanted to help with her mourning, but he was sure that she could do it faster than an amateur like him. After burying the bodies and taking care of the monster, he told the nun that she should head back home quickly, then turn around and walk away. The lady seemed frozen in shock and didn't respond. Later on, she realized that the man who helped her was none other than the Shadow Hero. She burst into tears and was grateful for the Shadow Hero that saved her life. However, the Shadow Hero saved life day by day without a trace, hoping his true identity will never be revealed. But he was wrong. In the Lilac Kingdom Southwest, Salamabart territory of Central District, his identity was already in the newspaper. He was frustrated and yelling at the same time, which is why his maid rushed towards him. The Shadow Hero is Phil Salambart, and heir of the Count Salambart family. Anyway, he was shocked to see numerous people gathering in front of their house asking for a simple wave for them. Then his maid, whose name is Karua Scarlet, suddenly appears in his room with a pail and a towel on her hand. Karua didn't mind his scream and started to mop the floor. But Phil didn't calm down to his frustration since it was the third time people gathered in their house. So she immediately rubbed the dirty towel she used on the floor on Phil's face to stop him from crying out loud. Karua became curious since there is no problem when people find out he's a Shadow Hero. Her suspicion for Phil became wild when the latter's face started to sweat, so she asked him if he was hiding something. Phil looked in the window and told Karua to listen and explained that yesterday, he helped someone as usual. The one he helped was a cute girl dressed elegantly and was begging him to repay him. He agreed and got too excited, then ended up in his usual brothel and drank too much. Inside the brothel, he was with a few ladies asking him for some heroic stories. Due to the alcohol, he started to spiel that he was Philip Salambart, the Shadow Hero. Karua assumes that it might be the reason why people discover him, but it was too impossible for the people to believe those words since the traits didn't match him, because Phil was the worthless son of a count's family. Day and night, he indulges in pleasure in the brothel and lies in complete depravity. People avoid his presence whenever they see him because of his bad reputation. He finds it strange because even the servant didn't have any respect for him. So why people mistake him for the Shadow Hero just because of a drunkard's words? But to his surprise, Karua suddenly realized that she left Phil's black outfit and mask hanging outside yesterday, and some random people recognized the clothes. She blamed Phil for drinking too much until he threw up and was covered with vomit. That's why she washed the clothes and hung them outside. She senses that Phil was mad, so she apologizes immediately, since she never knew that it could cause such a commotion. Phil didn't know what to do but to scream and cover his ears since he didn't want to hear any of Karua's excuses. Although he was not doing anything wrong, he was hiding his identity because he wanted to enjoy the unrestricted freedom he had. He wants to go to the brothel in the morning, afternoon, and even at night. He doesn't want to be restrained with some convenient excuses and used as a political tool. He doesn't want to willingly become a workhorse with a masochistic streak. For Phil, a hero who silently walks away after helping others is cool. Yet yesterday, he ended up giving his real name in the brothel, which is why he started to cry again and wanted to crawl in a hole. Karua comforted him, saying if he really hated to be identified, then he might as well not help people and just stay home quietly. But Phil couldn't ignore someone who's in trouble. The latter burst into anger when Karua smirked at him since she was confused if Phil was a good guy or not, because he didn't want to be found and just wanted to live smart and walk a carefree life. He also doesn't want to become a tool in noble society swirling with deceit and schemes. Especially, he doesn't want to get involved with the royal family. Karua interrupted him and gave him a letter from the royal family. Even though he didn't want to eat breakfast, he still ate everything, but still, he looked exhausted because his identity had been exposed. Karua changed the topic and asked if he had already read the letter, which is why Phil stood on the window trying to calm himself, but saw numerous people asking for a sign. That's why he abruptly closed the window and decided to lock himself in a hut. He was furious when Karua told him to just wave at those people confidently since there's no harm. He didn't want to do it because who would want to see a scene going to the brothel while being sent off by the crowd? He yells that he doesn't want to stop going to the brothel since it's the meaning of his life. But he suddenly stopped when he sensed something. It was his younger brother, Zan Salmibert, who had suddenly come into his room. He misunderstood that he heard a squealing of a pig, but it's just him and the reason why their house is shaking. Karua was worried that the two men would have a fight, which is why he told Phil not to say things that make things complicated. Anyway, Zan wants to speak with Phil regarding the noise outside. He pointed his finger at him, asking to stop the people who mistakenly called Phil as the Shadow Hero. The uproar outside was just some kind of a joke since Phil has no talent, can't do any work, and is not blessed with martial skills. Instead of getting angry, Phil seems to like Zan's words. So he turns to Karua and commands her to spread his words around so no one believes that he is the Shadow Hero. The latter didn't want to do it. Zan heard it, so he commanded Karua to become his. The latter exclaimed that she didn't want to, and that would never happen. Zan became mad since she didn't know how to speak properly for just a mere maid. Karua became serious and grabbed Phil and pointed out that he was his master. She will decide whom she respects and whom she serves. Zan insists since he was a guest, and she can't change the fact that she's still a maid, so she better give up and become his maid. Karua couldn't control her anger. That's why she suddenly kicked Zan right on his face. When she does, Phil sees what color she is wearing underneath, so she even kicks him in the face. The two brothers both lay on the ground holding their jaws and eyes. Then she commanded the other maid to leave the place along with Zan, so they quickly lift him and leave the room. Afterwards, Phil complained that he was not feeling well, but Karua didn't mind him since he had a guest to see him. Phil asked her who it was, but before Karua could explain, a saint suddenly appears. She is a blessed one of the goddess of Aristism, a religion followed worldwide, a being that brings happiness to people and protects them from calamities. The goddess introduced herself as Milas upon her arrival. Phil doesn't have any idea of her sudden visit, and he is not a fan of Aristism. For him, she was just an unusual guest, but the face of Milas, he knew he had seen it before. Still, he welcomes her and guides her to the sofa. He immediately asks about the purpose of the saint's visit. His eyes widened when Milas frankly said that she really wanted to meet Phil. The latter finds it hard to talk over Milas' presence. He feels suffocated, and it feels different from talking to some noble. Anyway, he already knew that Milas was there because of the rumors that he was the shadow hero, so he immediately commanded Karua that he would explain that he was just a worthless guy and quickly send Milas away. On the other hand, Milas told him the reason why she went in their place was to thank him. When Phil heard it, he told Karua that if Milas wanted to say thank you, a strip show would be nice. In other words, he wants to see her like a newborn baby. He planned to bluff his way through, so he smiled and wondered if the saintess believed the rumor that he was the shadow hero. The saintess asked him to call her by her name and mentioned that she had also heard he was a good-for-nothing parasitic son, like dog poop on the street that I stepped on last night. While Phil's soul nearly left his body from the saintess's overwhelming energy, Karua asked if he remembered saving this child. The latter admits that he does remember helping a girl wearing clothes a month ago, and he thought she was a nun. Whatever it is, for that moment, he needs to get them to leave peacefully and of their own accord without being rude. It's hard for him to explain, but he smiles politely and admits that he is rumored to be a shadow hero, but that's incorrect since he's just a fan. The public outfit is just a cosplay, and for a trash like him to be called as a shadow hero is far too presumptuous. He became silent when the saint said that their voice and height were similar. No matter what he reasoned, it's useless because even his smell was known by the saint. So he started to get worried because he didn't think he could manage to cover it up. He wanted to leave the place, but Karua held his shoulder tightly for him not to be able to stand up. He was surprised when Milas was so sure that he is the shadow hero and knew the first time she met him. Her only concern was that the Archbishop let her travel without any trouble. She can't help but become nervous. They are staring at each other when suddenly someone breaks into their window. Then two men suddenly appear and attack them. Karua immediately carried the saint to avoid them. Meanwhile, Phil quickly kicks a huge table, then throws it at the two attackers. One of the attackers was confused when Phil's hand suddenly penetrated the table, while the other was confused how it all happened because the table slammed on the ground, so where is his companion? But the attacker widened his eyes when out of the dark, Phil suddenly spoke, used his restraint magic, then grabbed his hair and slammed him on the ground. He opens the great door to a world without freedom and throws the attacker on that place. Everyone was surprised, especially the saint who was staring at him. As she expected, Phil was the real shadow hero, and it made the latter worried. On the other hand, in a dark place, three people wearing a cloak were having a conversation regarding the skilled assassin who hadn't returned yet. A lady holding a staff formed an evil smile. One of the essential elements in magic is the essential of carved names. Magic is activated by imprinting an ideal onto a spell, and for that, carved names are used. There are as many spells as there are ideals held by mages. Phil's magic consists of submerging the target into a woven space and restricting their movements. The carved name for it is the freedom of not being completely bound to anyone. Meanwhile, Phil woke up being tied. He was confused if he developed a new fetish in his sleep or got caught up in some serious incidents, but his thoughts fade when Karua suddenly arrives. He immediately greets his maid, yet she ignores him and asks about his plan for that day. When he responds, he will go to the brothel after breakfast. Karua didn't regret tying him up, so he couldn't leave the saint unattended. Realizing he used his magic in front of the saint, Phil gritted his teeth in frustration. He can't hide his secret from them anymore. Meanwhile, the saint was already elaborating every detail of what happened last night to the guards. She claims that Phil was the true and real shadow hero after witnessing his power. Guards were confused because in the city, they called him a useless and worthless son but for the saint. Even if Phil stubbornly denied it, she knew that he is a wonderful person. She remembers the time he saves her. She could feel his heart that's full of genuine kindness. She was sure that there must be a reason behind. On the other hand, Phil was still lying on the bed when suddenly he made a disgusting sneeze with a snot. Karua changed the topic and asked him about yesterday's attack. It's probably just another faction dispute since they don't have a pope in the church, and the previous one passed away and there is no successor. Currently, two archbishops are competing for the position. One is an elderly man with a long career and the other, apparently, is a young woman whose identity remains a mystery. There are also two saints and their authority and number of powers are evenly balanced. The faction struggle between the two archbishops. He was confused if they really send a valuable saint just because of a simple rumor. They might have wanted to establish a relationship with the shadow hero. In that way, they could publicly say that the shadow hero has joined their faction. But the way he sees Milas, she only came there to sincerely express her gratitude. But it seems the archbishop likely exploited the saint's gesture for his own gain. Since the two were competing for popularity and ambition, there was also a bloody story. So it's possible that yesterday's attackers were sent by the rival faction. Even if one saint disappears, the power balance would tip drastically. It's obvious yesterday that she's a target. Things would be clearer if the attackers didn't poison themselves. Phil was frustrated because of the event, but as long as the saint was with them, he knew she was safe. Since they come to an agreement, Phil asks his maid if she could take off the rope. because if she won't, he won't be able to visit the brothel and pick up flowers. He kicked his maid out of irritation because he felt like he was still a child. Karuo was not bothered by his tantrums, challenging him to show her his cuteness back then. But to her surprise, Phil suddenly jumps out of bed because if she doesn't untie him, he will make history on that same sheet. He couldn't handle it anymore and wanted to pee. Karuo didn't believe him, thinking he would probably go to the brothel if she untied him. Phil was holding his hot dog when the door opened and Millis suddenly came in. The saint was shocked to see them, so she immediately turned around and apologized for the trouble. While the Shadow Hero fan club gathered outside, Phil was in the library, writing and mumbling that nothing good had happened the previous day. He was irritated when he remembered about the rope, but at least he cleared up the misunderstanding with the saint. Anyway, he looks at the report to find that the security guards are worsening. He was confused if the staff were short-aged that bad because all the residents in his territory are just rebellious teenagers. So he decided to increase the numbers of their guards to put those kids in their place. A hand interrupts him asking to open his mouth. He allowed a sigh, but the owner of the hands urged him to open his mouth to take the food that she was giving. He can't do anything but to look at Karua and take the food while reading some reports. Karua seems irritated because Phil only focuses on the report. The owner of the hand that keeps feeding him while she sits on his lap is none other than Milas. Noticing the maid will explode, Phil turns to the saint. Millis thanked him for saving her twice and plans to stay for a long time. She planned to do something to make him happy as a thank you, and blushed as she stared at his face. Phil softens his face, wondering if having a younger sister feels like this. Karua pinched his face for melting just because the saint was cute, but Phil whispered that it was all part of the plan. Befriend the saint and have her spread the word that he isn't that shadow hero. Because if Millis can't be fooled, at least she has the influence to fool the others. He looked at the window and noticed that the number of people was increasing. It confuses him because it was just a rumor that he is the shadow hero, but the people don't fade. Karua explained that the saint who never planned a pilgrimage suddenly appeared to see him. It was clear that the moment she came to visit him, it was already over. It seems that someone is spreading the rumor all over the city and their suspect is the saint. So Phil walks towards her and asks about her escort knights. When the saint answered that they are interacting with the villagers to spread the faith of Aristism and what happened yesterday, Phil was gloomy because he can't use the saint as an excuse anymore. Millis was confused, so she asked him if he didn't want others to know that he is the shadow hero. She feels that she's a burden. Although the latter was confused, he comforted the saint since he could see that she didn't mean any harm. However, Karua interrupted them and asked about his plan for the royal family's letter because he was ignoring it since the beginning of this story. He was sure that the letter was an order for him to appear at the court. He doesn't want to be used as a political tool, which is why he kept ignoring it. He just reasoned out that he was busy attending with the saint. Millis was worried because it could be an important royal matter. Phil bowed before her like a prince and assured that she was more important to him. People might have seen what happened, so they accused Phil for deceiving girls. They even demand to see his face. Later that night, Karua helped Phil wear his black outfit as a shadow hero. It seems the nobles in Count Amethyst's territory are being attacked by bandits, so he has to go and handle it. But before he could go, Karua reminded him that if he didn't want to be exposed, maybe he shouldn't go. There's no need for him to risk himself. Phil cut her off because he can't ignore someone else's misfortune. Karua was speechless and agreed with him after all. She was also helped by his kindness too. He became sad and remembered someone, but he abruptly erased it since it's a good opportunity, and he will use it to clear those rumors. After helping, he planned to introduce himself with a fake name. If the shadow hero himself says that he's not Phil, then the rumor that he is the shadow hero will disappear. Karua was delighted by his wonderful idea. Since she was impressed, he asked if he could go back to the brothel, but the maid didn't let him. He then used his magic and left Karua alone. Meanwhile, on the road to Amethysia territory, Phil arrived. He saw a strange man who was kneeling on the ground, waiting for him. He commanded the man to lift his head because he didn't want to be treated with such reverence. The man refuses because it's his way of honoring the shadow hero who saved them in the past. However, the man was about to report the current situation when Phil interrupted him because he was familiar with those bandits. So he immediately jumped to strike. On the other hand, guards were fighting against the bandits to stay away from the carriage and to protect the young lady. But the lady seems stubborn and gets out of the carriage because she too wants to fight. One of the guard look at her and order her to return since it's too dangerous. That's why he didn't saw that there was a bandit approaching him and striking him with his sword. Then he aimed for the young lady and was about to strike. The lady closed her eyes ready to accept the attack, but someone stopped the bandits. She was stunned when she saw a man who knocked the bandits to the ground. She was about to ask Phil, but the latter cut her off to save her questions for later since that isn't the time for an interrogation. Her eyes widened when she finally realized that the man was none other than the shadow hero because of his black clothes and plain mask. Phil smirked and didn't respond, just continued walking towards the enemy. Then he lifts up his hand, and the atmosphere becomes dark. Bandits drop their jaws in shock. They were all scared when a vast ocean invited them into a world of restraints. They all run for their lives, trying to escape the disaster that's coming. But they couldn't escape from it and drowned. Moments passed, the disaster ended. People of Amethysia were all safe. Then the young lady expressed her gratitude on behalf of everyone and introduced herself as Alicia Amethysts, the only daughter of the Amethysts Count family. Phil was overwhelmed but didn't do it to receive gratitude. Instead, he starts to announce his hidden agenda. Since they all knew that he was the shadow hero, he told them that his name was Phi, almost spilled his real name. He told them that lately, some imposters have been pretending to be the shadow hero, but they are fake. He started walking away and reminded them to spread the rumor. Alicia rode the carriage and thanked him. She finds him a strange young man, yet a good one. Meanwhile, Karua and Millis were taking a nice bath. The latter apologized for coming unexpectedly. All she wanted was a little chat and thought it would be a good way to pass the time until Phil returns. Karua was a bit shy because Millis invited how mature she looked and wanted to look more grown up. Yet she invited her twin mountain Fuji because her baby mountain was too small for a grown-up. She found the saint attractive, but Millis didn't take it seriously since she wanted to be an adult woman like Kira Oni-chan. The name was not her sister, but someone who's always taking care of her. A person who was warm, kind, and understanding. Lately she didn't see her that much, which is why she was so sad. She was determined to become an adult. That's why she'll eat a lot of food. Karua became confused when the saint changed their topic and asked more about Phil. Meanwhile, Shadow Hero tied the bandits but undecided what to do with them after they woke up. While thinking, he was surprised when a lady with a huge hammer suddenly appeared. He told her that a woman walking alone at night is dangerous. The lady asked him back if he was willing to escort her, but Phil can sense something on the lady. Also, he noticed the habit that the lady was wearing is the same as Nillis, so he assumed that the lady was a nun too. He was sure that she was not normal. He was flustered when the lady called him by his real name, so he immediately corrected her that his real name was Phi. Since the lady was beautiful, he asked if she would like to go out with him next night. The lady laughs and refuses since a man with so many secrets isn't her type and assumes that he is someone who could be unfaithful. So Phil immediately told her that he is a faithful one, though he can sense that the lady knows more about him. Since the lady had no business with him, she approached her target. To his shock, the lady suddenly attacked the bandits one by one using her hammer. Blood was scattered, but the lady seemed satisfied and turned around like nothing happened. He burst into anger and called the lady, but she ignores his anger, stating that helping people is fine, but true salvation only comes when he kills the villains. Those words made him flustered. Phil notices one morning that people still haven't left their house. He was irritated because things got worse. Public safety and his workload is increasing. His brother was also his problem because he kept insisting Millis to be his woman. He also kept thinking about the nun last night. He was bothered by her actions. He couldn't control himself and cry out loud because trouble just kept piling up. He was frustrated and wanted to cry when Karua informed him that the princess had visited. The kingdom of Lilac has 3 princesses. They have been educated since childhood to support the crown prince. One excelled in martial arts, one in virtue, and one in strategy. Among them, there is a princess admired and respected by everyone by her exceptional intelligence. It's Nicola-sama, the second princess of the kingdom of Lilac. However, Phil went to the guest and apologized for keeping her waiting. Nicola didn't mind, but she immediately gave Phil a hard punch on his face for being too busy to respond. He was almost knocked out, but promised himself that he'll do his best to avoid it next time. In addition, Nicola noticed that the saint was already there. She also observes Karua. She didn't expect that the latter was really working as a maid after she disappeared. She was a duke's daughter, yet she chose to serve the heir of a count's family. However, Phil interrupts and asks the reason for Nicola to come over. Karua seems annoyed because Phil pretends to know when Nicola tells them the reason was the same as what was written on the letter that Phil never intended to open since chapter 1. Anyway, since Karua already read it, she whispered to Phil that it was an invitation to the crown prince's birthday party. Although Phil found it weird, he made sure that he would attend to celebrate the prince's birthday. But he almost melted when Nicola stated that it's an honor to be congratulated by a shadow hero. He wanted to explain that he was just an ordinary noble, but the lady was too stubborn and continued the conversation under the assumption that he was the shadow hero. So that means the princess came just to confirm that he was the real shadow hero, and it could be a problem when the princess leaves convinced. If that conclusion reaches His Majesty's ears, he might be used as a workhorse for optical schemes. So he needs to make her reconsider that right away. He quickly asked for Millis' help to tell Nicola that he was not the shadow hero. The saint was surprised because he was asking her to lie. So he explained that it could be troublesome if the royal family found his true identity. The saint agreed. Phil was sure that he could use the saint's influence and his future depends on her. Millis stated that Phil wasn't the shadow hero because he didn't have a black outfit or a plain mask. He hadn't even used magic like the shadow hero. Nicola inquired whether the saintess had helped Phil acquire the black outfit and mask, and even perform shadow hero magic. Before the not-so-good-at-lying saintess could spill more secrets, Phil covered her mouth. This idiot had chosen the wrong person to lie for him, which made Nicola confirm everything and feel relieved that she could give a good report to the king. Phil burst into tears and wanted to abandon the Salmabart family by jumping out of the window. Karua stopped him since he is not sure if he'll be working like a horse yet. Nicola agreed with her because she has no intention of using him. She became serious and explained that she didn't want to make a wrong move and risk upsetting Phil. The latter was confused because Nicola ended the conversation without digging deeper. He found her as a true strategist. Anyway, Nicola decided to leave and invite the saint to come to the party. She turns to Phil and blames him for not replying to the letter, because if he does, she wouldn't have had to come all the way. Phil was surprised when Nicola stated that another reason she had come was that he had actually saved her once. However, Phil didn't remember it at all. She also warned him that the upcoming birthday seems like there are more church officials than usual. Among them, there are also high-ranking individuals who don't usually attend, so he have to be careful. Phil was left speechless. A few days have passed. Phil was in the mood since he decided to come to the palace. He needs to prepare. Millis noticed it and was relieved because she was feeling down after the princess arrived. Also, after a week of ignoring the people, the loud cheers from outside start to quiet down. and the expectations have decreased. It's now easy for him to come to the brothel, and it makes him feel more excited. Millie's heard him, so he changed the topic and said that he will show her a new place because the mansion might get her bored. The saint opposed him because she have fun every day even though she was inside the mansion. Later on, they reached the place where guards were practicing their sword. The saintess thanked them for their hard work. She guessed that Phil was going to show her the practice scene. She was surprised when she saw that even the church knights were participating in the training. It didn't bother Phil because he assumed that she must be tired of just proselytizing all the time. The saint was so thankful for the help that Phil offered. Later on, they walk in another room where Karua was participating as an instructor. He wants to show her the training against mages. Millis was astonished when Karua suddenly disappeared, then reappear and immediately attack all the guards. In that mansion, there are only two people who can use magic. They are Karua and Phil. The latter was confused on why would such an amazing person stay by the side of someone like him. The power to stay close to the one he desires at any time, no matter when. The magic created from that ideal is largely divided into three: the enhancement of speed, the enhancement of vision, and the physical enhancement. Although Karua doesn't have visible flashiness, she certainly possesses the power to influence the battlefield. On the other hand, Karua seems satisfied in training. Everyone is better than their previous training and lasted longer. All the knights were lying on the ground, looking exhausted. They were all brought down by one lady. Karua was surprised when she saw the two. Phil looks satisfied by the training, so Karua suggests getting some reward. She was stunned when Phil quickly agreed and also wanted to buy something for Milas. As they walked outside, Phil waved goodbye for his regular report. Although he doesn't have to go every time so diligently, he's a gentleman who properly follows the rules. Afterwards, Phil went to the Duke Scarlet mansion to meet Ares Scarlet, head of the Duke Scarlet family. The latter was asking about her daughter Karua. He made a report that his daughter was, as usual, throwing insults at him every day. Ares seems fond because he knew his daughter was as lively as ever. He even compliments Phil for being diligent since he takes time to come once a month. Phil let out a sigh because naturally, one will feel uneasy when the Duke entrusted his precious daughter to somebody. Duke smiled because he was not just somebody since he was the shadow hero. Upon hearing this, Phil felt gloomy again. However, when Karua suddenly told his father that she wanted to serve the shadow hero, he was surprised. Phil furrowed his brow since he remembered that he never expected that the young lady he saved would rip off his mask and force him to return to her house while grabbing by the scruff of his neck. The Duke remembers when Karua was being abducted from a party hosted by a certain noble. Upon investigation, it was a crime committed by a noble who has feelings for her. It was discovered that she was kidnapped by people hired for an underground guild. It causes a commotion. He was still wondering what would happen to Karua if she hadn't been found. The underground guild and the noble were both caught, and it's a story Phil could boast about more. Phil laughs because he avoids standing out as much as possible. And because of mischievous Karua, the Duke's whole family finds out that he was the shadow hero. Phil smiled at the fact that he knew Karua was doing well. For 2 years, she's been by the side of someone as useless as him. The Duke changed the topic and asked him to get engaged as soon as possible. Phil opposes it since he knows Karua will be treated as a weirdo if she's with him. The Duke resists him because by that moment, people's opinion of him has already changed because of him being the shadow hero. Rather than that, as long as his daughter is happy because it's all that matters to him. Phil was speechless at first, but he told the Duke that he can't make a promise since he doesn't even know where Karua's feelings are directed. But he will definitely make Karua happy, and he won't make the Duke regret for entrusting her to him. Ares was delighted upon hearing his words because he knew he would take care of his precious Karua. 2 weeks had passed, and the three went to the birthday celebration at the Lilac Palace. Milas dropped her jaw when she saw that there were many people at the event. As expected of the palace, everywhere is sparkling. Both Karua and Milas were sparkling too. Phil furrowed her brow when he remembered that they went to the store to buy clothes for them as promised. He dared to choose a deep black gown for Milas instead with the pure white of a saint. The decorations are shining like stars in the night, completely changing the usual impression. The contrast with her adorable face and exactly the little devil style. However, Karua chose an unconventional white. With pure white, it matches the chandelier and shines brilliantly. In other words, Karua will be the star of the venue. He is delighted because his efforts have been recognized since everyone is captivated by the two beautiful ladies. Milas and Karua were appreciating each other for their stunning looks. They were glad they were able to enter the palace safely. They didn't think that they are foolish enough to cause trouble in the palace, but they were wrong because it looks like Phil is the one being watched. Phil dropped his jaw when everyone started to walk towards him and greeted him as the shadow hero. He was irritated because he felt like a new product for the people. The rumors are spreading and everyone is trying to take action. Before people flocked around him, he told Milas, who was trying to avoid those people, to go and talk with the people from the church. Phil and Karua were worried about her because they couldn't leave her in a pack of wild beasts. Furthermore, people recognized Karua, but the latter opposed them immediately because she was currently just a mere maid. People started to talk about them regarding their rumored engagement. Others want a better negotiation directly with the Count. As he thought of a way to escape this loud commotion, Karua told him she had an idea. She calls everyone's attention and asks them to refrain from talking about their marriage proposal because Phil is progressing with an engagement with her. Upon hearing it, Phil looks confused, as if he suddenly farts, but a round brown chunk was included. People at the party were shocked when they heard the news that Phil and Karua were already engaged. Then they both run away to avoid any questions from the guests. Phil was confused if the story that Karua fabricated is a lie, but it still depends on him. Afterwards, they both on a couch while drinking grape juice. Phil was bewildered because a noble's daughter that he once saved didn't have any effect, even though he used a fake name. Suddenly, Millis arrives, who got a bit lost in the palace. She talks to other church people, but it's hard for her to get along from different factions. Although they are all equally believers, they have different directions. However, she can't deny that there are people who are very conscious of factional conflicts. While having a conversation, an old man wanted to catch Phil's attention. It looks like the latter senses the man, so he immediately runs, but the old man knows that he will escape, so he quickly follows him. Unfortunately, Phil was being captured and grabbed his head. The old man is Phil's father, Roy Salambart, current head of the Salambart family. Furthermore, Millis was stunned when Phil called the man as his father. Then a lady interrupts and apologizes for her husband's behavior, then greets the two ladies. She is Maria Salambart, the beautiful mother of Phil, Countess of Salambart. However, Roy furrowed his brow and grabbed a pineapple. He clarifies to Phil if his engagement with Karua is really processing. Phil advised his father not to believe in rumors just because he overheard them. Then his father threw him the pineapple, so he immediately bowed down to apologize as well as to dodge the pineapple. Because of the commotion, Maria apologizes to Karua since her son always causes trouble. Then she noticed Millis, who quickly introduced herself. The latter was surprised when Maria told her that she heard a lot about her from Karua, because the latter always report their situation. She also reports the saints staying in their mansion and Phil being the shadow hero. Phil clarified it was just a misunderstanding. He was caught off guard since he never told his father, and only Karua's family knew his secret. He didn't want to tell because his father is the captain of the Royal Knights, so if they know his identity, they'll definitely try to recruit him. Because for him, mages are valuable assets to fight for their country. Maria agreed with her son because Phil will inherit their family title. The latter was stunned when his mother suddenly hugged him and was so proud of him. Maria told her husband to head back and lecture his other son. Then she turned to the saint and assured that she can always rely on his son. She also told Karua to feel free to come to their house since she's like a daughter to her. Phil's parents decided to leave, but before they did, Roy told Phil how proud he was for growing up to be such a fine man. Phil was speechless. It looks like it's the first time he heard those words from his father. Phil let out a sigh and thought about his proud parents. They are really such good people. Afterwards, Kuon Lilac, Crown Prince of Lilac Kingdom, arrived. He greets his visitors and was grateful for coming on his birthday. Then the three bowed to pay respect to the Crown Prince and greeted him. Phil was surprised when someone called his name. It was Nicola, who seemed happy to see him. He didn't see His Majesty and the other princesses around because they are currently dealing with the war in the south. His father came to the party as the Crown Prince's escort. He knew that they dragged him in that event to assure that they can relax even if there's a war going on. He was surprised when Karua told him that the current war situation seems favorable, and because he has no idea that it has already started. The latter furrowed her brow because if they told him about it, he would surely rush straight to the battlefield, and she wouldn't let him go. Then Phil suddenly gulps when the prince interrupts them and clarifies if he was the so-called shadow hero. He was sweating and nervous, yet he explained that it's just an unverified rumor with no evidence and is a fan who's been collecting his costumes. He tried to answer every question, but he felt uneasy as if tears wanted to run down his face when the Crown Prince didn't get any good answer. Nicola reminded her brother that he needed to be more careful since Phil didn't let them dig deeper. Phil was delighted when at last the interrogation ended, but his smile vanished when Nicola asked him to talk later. As Karua expected, Nicola didn't seem to let her prey escape. Later on, Phil went alone to the terrace to get some fresh air. He was so exhausted that's why he didn't want to attend that event. Karua was with her family while Milas probably went to chat with the church people. He let out a sigh because he felt that he was being drifted further away from a free life that he previously had. However, his eyes widened in surprise when someone called him. It was Alicia of Amethysia family that he once saved from the bandits. The lady was frightened when Phil suddenly shouted and burst out his anger at her for not spreading the word that the shadow hero's name was Phi and not him. If she spread that, the information would have gotten worse. Although Alicia was confused, she still apologized. Phil calmed down afterwards. He admitted that he was being unreasonable, and he was the one who needed to apologize. Alicia opposes his words since he helped him, but she repays with ingratitude. Anyway, Phil was bewildered because Alicia knew his name. The latter explains that she has a good memory for voices, so once she hears it, she can't forget it. Phil realized he had tried to deceive the wrong person. Though she heard about the rumors, she already knew it. Philip noticed the pendant that Alicia was wearing. It's a pendant that everyone in her family wears. He was impressed that her whole family was wearing such a devotee. They continue their conversation regarding the faction conflicts. It's a mess because even at parties, there's a tense atmosphere. Everyone's desperate to gain sponsors for the Judgment faction. Aristism is divided into two factions. The Arbitration is about maintaining the status quo. They want to spread the teaching of goddesses. The Judgment faction is basically the same, but they don't tolerate evil. Those who disrupt peace and deviate church policies, that faction will play judge in place of the goddess. Phil finds it quite dangerous, yet Alicia corrects him because they've actually judged quite a few people with no force. In addition, they manage to attract followers being that extreme because people are tired of bandits and criminals, so it's easy to identify criminals. And someone like Phil who did something similar as the shadow hero would understand. He was sad because he knew it exactly. They both prefer the Arbitration faction since Phil's father was in that faction. If he was going to get dragged into war, he guessed that he'll side with the Arbitration faction. He was surprised when Alicia was happy that she found him. She wanted to thank him properly after being saved. The latter was confused when Phil admitted that he didn't help other people for thanks. It's his hobby. A scoundrel and playboy like him has to be unusual. Alicia smiles when Phil teases him that if she stays longer next to him, she might dirty her eyes. His eyes widened when Alicia gave him a sweet smile and admitted that he looked like a cool hero. Anyway, he didn't entertain the feeling because it's getting tiring for him to keep pretending to be lost. He waved her goodbye and was about to leave when Alicia asked him if he knew that Milas was from the arbitration faction. Phil already knew it just by watching her. Alicia laughed because, as expected, he got a good eye. Then she reminds him about Kira Rulamul, who's with the Judgment faction. Alicia was confused because Phil didn't know the name where he already met him once. Meanwhile, Milas was in a hurry. Her conversation with another guest went longer than she expected. On her way, someone called her name. When she turned around, she was delighted when she saw Kira. She rushed towards the lady and gave her a warm hug. She didn't expect that she would see her at the party. She guesses that Kira might be there to recruit for Phil. Kira furrowed her brow because that's her original plan, but she knew even if she tried, he'd probably refuse. Milas was confused that Kira already knew that Phil would refuse. It's not that strange because the Judgment faction once attacked Milas after all. Milas remembers the day when someone attacked her. All along, she misunderstood that it was instruction from the ruling faction. Before she could finish her sentence, her eyes widened when Kira reminded her to stay away since she was the saint of the Judgment faction. They act based on justice and eliminate any obstacles, even if that person is a good one like Milas. If she had the same intention, she would have killed Milas because she was a distorted person in a distorted faction. She reminds Milas to stay cautious at least until the conflict is over. She has to make sure to properly fulfill her duty from the Archbishop. Then she turns around and walks away, but before she could do so, Milas seemed to cry, asking her why she joined that faction if she was aware that it's distorted. Kira darkened her face and stated that she was utterly hopeless and cannot forgive villains. Meanwhile, Karua and Phil were already inside. The latter complains that his mental strength is about to hit rock bottom dealing with Nicola and the other. Suddenly, Milas arrives, who looks sad, which is why Phil immediately asks if something happened. Milas lied. Phil furrowed his brow when he noticed that they were already surrounded by several ladies. To avoid them, he asks Milas to dance with him, because if he was dancing with the saints, those ladies wouldn't come near him, so he begged the saint to create a grand memory at the party. So he offered his hand and the saint gladly accepted it. After the castle visit, which was full of worries, was safely concluded, people dropped their jaws when they saw Milas and Phil were chasing a kitten. They literally rushed so that the kitten never loses their sight. But it looks like his fans are getting their way, so they immediately went to an alley and hid in some barrel. They take a peek to check if people didn't notice them. Fortunately, they were not. They were surprised when Karua suddenly appeared on their back, curious if they had caught the kitten. She was surprised when she heard that Phil was trying to catch a lost kitten. So Phil explained that he received a report that a child was crying because their pet cat ran away. They have a chance, so he thought they should help look for it. But he furrowed his brow when Milas called him as the Shadow Hero, so he reminded her not to call him that name too much when they were in the city. However, being in a lively place gives him energy and a way to refresh himself. Since there were no reports that the kitten was not found, they have to continue searching. But Karua began to argue with him to stop searching because she was afraid of the kitten. For her, thinking about them made her chill aside from they were wobbly and scary. So she is useless for that search and needs Millie's help. If she does it right, he promised that he will make hamburger steak for dinner. The saint was delighted by the thoughts of the hamburger, but searching for the kitten is quite difficult since they can't use their magic. Because if Karua uses magic in that city, people will die. If she moves at high speed, she might run people over. He too didn't want to expose himself as a shadow hero and must not leave any traces of magic. That's why he put his hope on Milas to help him. The latter will go and search for the left side of the alley, but Phil stops her. He is confused if the saint has a good sense of direction. The saint admitted that she lost a few times, so she should be fine. Since Karua was scared, she ran away as soon as she found it, but she did not touch it since the goal was to capture it. It's her weakness. If they don't hurry, the kitten will go on an adventure outside the city, so Phil decided to try a different approach. The two ladies were stunned when he suddenly put her arms on their waist. Then he used his magic to jump on the high building at a high speed. He was happy when they arrived, but his smile vanished because Karua was angry for doing it all of a sudden. That might cause trouble. So he explained that if they just walk through the streets, it feels like they are having a royal parade. That's why he decided to search from above. He wants to stay hidden as much as possible and keep a low stance. The key is to stick out only their faces. Karua, who is still mad, wonders if they'll be reported as stalkers because of Phil's bad behavior. The latter suddenly looked at her upon hearing his words, since he was just determined to find the said kitten. Anyway, searching for the kitten from above is quite innovative. Civilization has developed through that kind of gradual progress, and they won't get lost. With that, they don't have to worry about being called out by people. When Phil and Milas looked at the search document, Karua looked away and didn't pay attention. While they were looking down, busy searching for the kitten, they were not aware that the kitten was already beside them. And to top it all, it was already beside Karua. That's why the three suddenly stopped when the kitten made a short meow. Karua dropped her jaw and suddenly stood up out of fear. She was about to jump on the building, but Phil caught her feet and stopped her. Who would have thought that it was on the roof of the lighthouse democracy? Furthermore, the kitten and the three look like they are estimating each other as to who would act first. Milas can't wait. She rushes towards the kitten. Unfortunately, the kitten quickly jumped to avoid her. Her action didn't help, so he immediately used his restrained hands to catch it. But the kitten doesn't want to be caught and avoids Phil's magic. That's why the latter started to get irritated. When the kitten jumped on the other roof, he used all his might and magic until it was caught. Milas was happy while Karua was trembling at the sight of the kitten. Phil presented the kitten right in front of her, but Karua couldn't stand the sight. The saint was laughing until her eyes became wet. As she expected, being with them has never been boring. She wishes that it would last forever. Phil notices her sadness, so he gives her the kitten and asks what's bothering her. The two were surprised when the saint said that she decided to leave Phil's house. She received a mission from the Archbishop at the party and plans to head south. Phil understands her because it's her duty as the saint, but he was pissed off when Karua teased him about the saint being a problem when she first arrived. But now he looks lonely. The saint was sad because parting their ways is lonely. On the other hand, Phil saw how painful it was for her to say goodbye. Since she was being attacked before, she might be afraid to leave his side. Still, he knew she had her own circumstances. He reminded himself that rules influenced by other people aren't true freedom. He was surprised when the saint admitted that she was really happy about the dance at the party. She would do her best while holding on to that memory for support. The saint was trying to restrain her tears when Phil smiled at her and stated that he hates binding people's lives. But if those memories with him can support her from that moment on, he would be glad. Both Karua and Phil were delighted because Millis was happy to meet both of them. The three were surprised when people noticed a black arm from above where they were all standing. People couldn't recognize them, so he addressed the two ladies as the Black Division to return the kitten. He was frustrated because they were still not giving up. People were confused about whether it was the Dark Shadow Hero because it was too far away for them to see. Then the little boy was happy to see his pet again. 1 week had passed after the saint left the mansion. He was regaining his peaceful daily life from before. While looking at the window, he suddenly shouted out of frustration because the number of fans has increased compared to before. That's why Karua rushed towards him. Well, she blamed him that it was his fault because he used magic in the middle of the city. Then there's also the hospitality from the nobles she got acquainted with the party, handling a mountain of presents, responding to marriage proposals and sending rejections and so on. He burst into cry because complaints keep coming and the work that piled up during his absence is also waiting. He suddenly stopped when he was being asked about what he focuses on reading. Karua snatched the paper. She knew there was something that he didn't tell her. It's about the Civil War. He confessed that he'd beg his father about it, that the battlefield is at the southern border from their place, and it's just a small village. It's just that he just can't see it as someone else's problem. Karua furrowed her brow because it's the reason why she didn't tell him anything. So Phil told her not to worry because he was told with a condition that he wouldn't go. Anyway, the origin of the matter is the suppression of the minority ethnic group of the Algus Democratic Republic in the south by the Lilac Kingdom in the north. Radical ethnic groups living near the border have recently started causing a commotion and were judged to be at risk of crossing the border. However, as a result, the South claims that their own people were harmed. Under the pretext of a just cause, they began to invade the North, disregarding the rescue of the minority ethnic group. Phil suggests to Karua that she should hurry up and help her friends. But she didn't mind him because for her, it's natural for the ethnic minority to suddenly start making a fuss. But the more she heard about it, the more it seemed like the South was the one who stirred things up. In terms of the battle situation, they have the advantage. Even the Majesty and the First Prince seems to be leading and fighting. Phil comments that their morale must be on a whole different level compared to those who hastily put up a facade of justice and doesn't seem like they need to take action. Maria worriedly burst into his room, revealing that his father had gone to the North-South War. He remains composed and reasons that it's not strange since it's natural for knights to participate. But his father should guard the Crown Prince. In a war where they have advantage, it's possible to be pulled away from an important mission. If the tide of war has changed, then, the first closest territory, there should be the one to receive the summons. There are only 2 villages in the south. His eyes widen in terror because from their territory, there are only 2 small villages to the south. It was 2 empty villages and a series of peaceful mountains. Unless they're mountaineer, no one would willingly go south. If that's the case, Mill has received a mission from the Archbishop, so she plans to head south. It's strange to go on a pilgrimage to the empty south, because normally, when a saint visits a major city, the believers come to see her. He turns to his mother and asks about what his father mentioned before, that he will participate in the Civil War as an escort. The reason his father joined the war despite ignoring his duty as a royal guard is that an even greater reason has arisen. Karua guessed that it might be someone above the royal family, but she was wrong. Phil speculates that Milas might be involved in the war because the situation is different. There has never been a saint participating in a war before. A saint isn't a support role in the rear, and she's a believer above all else. Under normal circumstances, a saint would never go to the battlefield, regardless of the circumstances. Karua widened her eyes when she heard it, because on the battlefield, it wouldn't be strange for anyone to die. No matter who kills whom, it all ends with it can't be helped. In other words, in the chaos of the war, it wouldn't be surprising if a saint were assassinated. He immediately decides that they should be heading to Milas. During the war in the Lilac Kingdom's rear border area, a soldier was rushed for an emergency. The soldier was being hit by a spear. They immediately lay him down on the bed, then the saint used her magic to heal him. It's not a trick. The healing power is said to be wielded only by the saint. In an instant, the soldier quickly gets up off the bed because he was healed. The saint feels exhausted. She wanted the soldier to rest, but he ended up returning to the battlefield again, a true nature of the battlefield. Meanwhile, Karua wanted to stop Phil from going to the war. The latter told him to step back because he was going to deploy his shadow because he might be too late to save the saint. Karua insisted not to come since he made a promise to his father that he wouldn't get involved in the war. But he can't because he has the power to save the saint. They started to argue over the matter. Karua insists that the war is different from his usual acts of helping others, and he doesn't know what might happen to the battlefield. Phil widened his eyes when Karua asked him if he thought about how the people around him would feel if he died in the war. He looks at his mother, who looks worried by his decision, so he explained to them it's neither hypocrisy nor obligation. It's about his own pride and conviction. As long as people are alive, they are always taking someone else's freedom. If she breathes the air or eats food, someone else gets less of them. If he saved a person who has been attacked, you have to take away the freedom of the one who is attacking. That is how he lived his life. That's why the people he saved must be happy, because he needs to make it up to those whose freedom he has taken. That isn't pride built on the ideal of freedom. If he bends his principles, then that's not true freedom and would be the same as a prisoner of life. Besides, even if she didn't have freedom, he was sure that the saint would have done the same kind of thing. Karua let out a sigh, then decided to go with him. Phil opposes him because he has no intention in dragging her to his ideals. Karua insists because she has pride too, a mage. Phil was stunned when Karua stated that her ideal is to stand by the shadow hero. He let out a sigh and asked her not to die. So Karua made a promise that she wouldn't die as long as he remained alive, because if they end up dying together, Roy might scold her in hell. So Phil finally agreed. But the problem is they didn't know where the saint was, and it might take time to find her. Problem solved because Phil tied her up in the shadows during the party so he knows where she is. His magic is to bind and connect with those who have no hostile intentions and those who have a mark on the back of their hands. Karua was angry when she found out that he marked the saint during their dance, so she'll make sure to erase it properly when she meets the saintess. Afterwards, she sat by the window and was about to leave when Phil offered to come with him, but she refuses because his magic gives her a feeling of being restrained. She was about to jump when Phil reminded her not to overdo everything. Then she heard Maria tell Phil that he had changed with such determination. She was confused whether his changes were because of a child who had passed away. Phil softened his face and explained to his mother that he wouldn't walk the path of a true hero. He just wants to walk and show it to the heroes in heaven. So Karua asks Maria what they are talking about. The latter walks closer to Karua and explains that she was just talking about a boy who was previously close with Phil. She admits that she don't want to let Karua as a guardian, but if she's going to be there for Phil, then she won't stop her. At least she has to come back alive and help Phil not to become a hero. Karua smiles at her aunt, then immediately jumps out of the window. She's a mage and decides to stand by Phil's side. Afterwards, she reached the Lilac Kingdom borderline. She saw numerous soldiers killing each other. She was wondering if it would have been better to go after Phil, but she was worried if he was already encountering the assassin. Even if they join the war later, the chances of saving Millis will increase. If possible, she wants to save everyone because she can see with her own eyes how devastating the war is. If she will support Phil, then their aim is to end the civil war quickly. Then she jumps and rushes towards the soldiers. She immediately strikes each one who stands her way. Their opponent was confused. They misunderstood her as a maid because of her clothes. Their eyes widened when Karua suddenly disappeared and reappeared. She was not surprised that they were startled because she appeared with a maid's clothes. Since Phil was also wearing casual clothes, it's going to be a big problem. Anyway, she had to focus on their ally, who was stunned when they saw her and assumed that she was of help. They noticed that Karua was a mage and was there to help them, so they gathered their strength and made a push forward to counterattack. While doing so, Karua was stunned when she saw a girl inside of a barrier. The girl attacked Karua's group, but to the girl's shock, a dead body was dropped in front of her. She shouted in frustration because she was trying to maintain a sense of cleanliness in that manly battlefield. Nevertheless, Karua became serious because it's not surprising to have a mage on the battlefield. It's impossible for an ordinary soldier to fight properly against her. Later, the girl notices Karua in the crowd. Since Karua was wearing a maid's clothes, she was confused as she was offering a delivery service. She told Karua to leave the crowd before her uniform got dirty. Later on, she challenges Karua to be her opponent and fulfill their respective missions. Then she starts to release a massive amount of power, while Karua starts to rush towards her. Meanwhile, at the rear part of the border's first aid tent at the Lilac Kingdom, Mila's soldier seems worried about her because she ended up participating in the civil war without informing Phil. The saint reasoned that she can't make Phil worry unnecessarily. However, he saved her twice and provided a place to live. She can't keep piling up debts of gratitude any further. Moreover, the issue is a matter of the church, so she doesn't want any trouble for him. Since they were in a safety zone, she can take care of herself. To make sure the soldier didn't feel any worries, she smiled sweetly at him. But she knew there was no safe place on the battlefield, though the safe zone is far from it. She must not feel anxious because it'll make the soldier anxious too. She felt okay because she received courage and energy from Phil and the others just by the thoughts of their memory. Then she suddenly remembers Kira, who is also a saint like her. If they can reduce the number of casualties on the battlefield, they will surely won't lose even in the worst case scenario. So she begged the soldier not to worry. Everything will be all right. While she lightened their mood, they were stunned when an explosion suddenly occurred. Luckily, the soldier grabs her before everything gets worse. Millis widens her eyes at the sight of Kira, who seems the one who made the explosion. She was confused because she was supposed to be on standby at another post. Kira was delighted when the soldier guessed that she had come to attack the saint. She promises to give the soldier a reward for getting her reason. Then, as a reward, she lifted her hammer and attacked them again. The soldier groaned in pain after receiving that attack, so Millis immediately healed him. Millis never heard that she used her weapon. Kira was actually in a trump card kind of position, and that is her role in the faction. Millis turns to her with a sad face, asking why she attacked them. Kira let out a sigh because the attempt to assassinate her failed once. The church can't afford to let their assassination be exposed that many times. They must ensure that the assassination is successful on the next attempt. So the church thought it would be better to kill her on the battlefield. They knew that Milas will be placed in the safety zone since that place is far from the main battlefield. It's difficult for anyone to notice anything. Even if the soldier finds her dead, they will judge that the enemy kingdom, which outmaneuvers them, was the one who killed her. In that scenario, a direct kill would be more certain than any assassination plot. The soldier was furious because it's called the opposite faction, and the Judgment faction finally went as far as killing good people. Kira doesn't mind him because if the Archbishop of the Judgment faction becomes the Pope, that path itself will become justice. She accuses Melis of being a villain who is secretly trying to destroy the church. The two seem to have no choice but to accept their path. Then Kira lifted her hammer and was about to strike Melis, but the soldier rushed towards her with his sword. The soldier was shocked when his sword was cut almost at its handle. Then she lifted her hammer again and attacked him. As a result, the soldier was being thrown out. Melis was sad because she really likes Kira. As a fellow saint, she's been thinking of her like an older sister. Kira loves her too, but she has principles. She's not just a murderer, she has to save people who are lost and wandering in that world. In the end, she needs to kill bad people. For that to happen, she needs the arbitration faction to no longer exist, and that includes Melis. When Kira was about to hit Melis, she stopped when the latter asked her what she did wrong. She admired her the most, yet she has a killing intent towards her. Maybe because she participated in the Civil War, or their faction was different. Or maybe it's because she wasn't believing in the justice of having to kill someone in order to save someone else. But she don't like that. That's why until the end of her life, she lived an honest life. Kira was surprised not because of Melis' words, but because someone suddenly held her weapon. Then in dark, Phil appeared, calling her a self-proclaimed executor of justice. However, Kira was delighted because she knew Phil would come, the real villain. Phil remembers Kira as the one who killed those bandits. Phil doesn't know her reason, but she is clearly an enemy, the enforcer of justice who obstructs freedom. He walks towards Melis to check if she is okay. The latter was furious because he came to the battlefield to risk his life. Phil didn't need a reason to save her. He was free to choose to help her. He wants her to be happy, and that feeling alone is enough justification to clench his fist. He helped because he wanted to help, no need for other reasons. He remembered the boy when he was young. Whenever they wish for someone's smile, the reason can be a small selfish desire. So he made it clear to Melis that he wanted to protect her because she has a kind heart, and that's fine for him. After hearing his words, Melis burst into tears. However, Kira seemed annoyed by the sight, so she asked them to stop. Phil looks at her. Since she thinks that he was the villain, he challenges her to start a poll to find out who the real villain is. Kira pointed at him, claiming that he was the villain and she was the justice. Even if he made a survey, it won't budge since justice isn't always on the side of democracy. It's simple arithmetic. If there's one villain, kill them. The reason people are unhappy is because villains exist in their world like bandits, slave traders and lords who impose unreasonable taxes. Unhappiness is created by humans like them. Believing in goddess won't resolve, but if they kill the villains, everyone will be happy. That's why their Judgment faction is necessary to save the people of the world. Those who stand against them are villains too, and the two are no different. Phil believes Melis is the foremost person who should be saved. She travels across the land for the people, showing kindness and care. She should be the first person to find happiness. She was the one who made him want to stand in front and protect her. Kira held tight her weapon out of anger. No matter what Phil says, for her, villains should be absolutely eradicated and have to do it. In that case, they started to rush towards each other. Meanwhile, in the Lilac Kingdom border fort, the king was having a discussion with the others. They currently have the upper hand, but they lack the means to attack. Their opponents also deploy their mages. The church made quite a bold decision for sending 2 saints in the war. Roy stood up to summarize the battle situation. Currently, the battlefield is broadly divided between Eastern led by the First Princess troops, and now in an advantaged position after defeating 2 mages. The king laughs because the princess is also a top-class mage. That's why. The Jade Country Allied Corps is centered in the center. Thanks to the healing of the saint, they put up a good fight. Their problem is the west side. The closest Viscount doesn't have many troops, and it's too late for them. However, their reason for struggling is they lack offensive power. If they can break through even 1 point, the enemy might completely collapse. If they send reinforcement from another direction, they risk 1 point being attacked in reverse. While having a discussion, a soldier suddenly arrives and announces that the situation in the western has reversed. Their troops have been a full-scale assault on their enemy's position. They were all surprised because it might be a reckless charge. Anyway, the soldier also stated that a young girl joined their forces and caused chaos on the battlefield. And that girl is a citizen of their country, Karua Scarlet. On the other hand, Karua and the girl start their fight. The girl was furious because she can't keep up with Karua because of her speed. The latter noticed that she hasn't enhanced her eyesight. Her attack is simply about increased speed and outputting firepower. But she knew it won't work, so she needs to know what kind of barrier she has around her. She can't just rush into an attack. The girl was furious because she couldn't see Karua, so she decided to make an attack and make Karua realize her true magic. Then she started to clasp her hands and made a huge explosion. Karua didn't expect Ilya to attack recklessly, even hitting her comrade in the process. She was worried because she didn't know how far Ilya could expand her range. She has to do something before the damage gets worse. She guesses that Ilya was using a gravity magic and destroying everything, the only magic she knows, but she was confused because she could delve into her ideals. That's why she has to figure it out. She surprises Ilya by striking her sword on the barrier. She notices that there are no barriers for the newly released gravity. When the power is spread out, the barriers shrink. On the other hand, Ilya was frustrated because she was being interrupted. Karua learns that no matter how much she throws her sword, it won't hit the barrier, so she needs to increase her speed once more. Then Ilya continues to expand her magic because she plans on sweeping them all out at once. Then in an instant, every soldier was being thrown out of the battlefield. She was looking for Karua, yet she still couldn't see her. The latter notices that all she can do is to crush things and throw them away. It's bad because if she gets blown away, her speed will reset to the beginning. But she keeps going because if she succeeds in her plan, she's the winner. But if she fails, she'll be a lump of meat. So she made a decision. She immediately jumped at high speed and kicked Ilya, who was surprised after being hit on her face. As a result, the barrier crashed and Ilya was being thrown out and bounced like a ball. Ilya's allies were shocked when she landed on the ground. Karua was bewildered if her speed was a bit lacking because she was planning to smash her skull, yet she was still alive. She shakes off her clothes, then turns to her allies' soldiers and commands them to end the war. Meanwhile, on the western battlefield, Phil was laughing at Kira because she was being blown away nicely. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you love this manga. Have a good day.